And we're live. Friends from around the world, welcome to Sulha, where we work to reconcile between people in conflict. Today we're going to be discussing Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood in East Jerusalem that has been in the news in recent weeks. Some will frame the situation in Sheikh Jarrah as simply a real estate dispute that needs to be settled in the courts, while others will compare it or consider it to be ethnic cleansing. Today we're going to have an in-depth and nuanced conversation about exactly what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. We have a panel of Israelis and Palestinians, all very educated and open-minded people, and I'm very excited to have you all here. Before we get started, quick formalities. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We do these live streams every week. A big shout out to our Patreon visionary members. We have Trivium Energy Pty Ltd. We have SOG Cannabis. We have Max Marine, Geffen Posner, Adam Albilia, Maya, Adam Becker, and our one and only champion member, Rajia. If you want to be a patron or support the show, you can find information in the description. All and any support really help us do what we do, and that's reconcile between people in conflict, primarily Israelis and Palestinians, that conflict being close to home and close to heart. Panelists, it's great to have you all here. I just want to start by getting an introduction. We'll start with an introduction from each of you, and then you could also share your thoughts on the situation in Sheikh Jarrah. To our audience, we're going to have, this panel will go on for a little bit, like around an hour, and then we're going to take audience questions. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. Obviously, we're going to prioritize super chats. You can find the super chat button near the send comment button. It looks like a dollar symbol. And yeah, let's get the show on the road. Avichai, let's start with you.
Hi, Adar, and hi to all the other panelists. I'm really thrilled to be here. And before I say anything about myself, obviously a huge thanks to Adar for organizing these sorts of things at a time when so much of what we see on TV revolves around rockets, political violence, and very extreme rhetoric within Israel-Palestine, really from both within all of the ethnic communities. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be able to talk to all of you today. With regard to my positions, I think that for 54 years now, really, Israel has governed the West Bank and East Jerusalem in a way which, at best, really utterly disregards and frequently abuses the rights of Palestinians who are living there. That is very obvious to me. And I think that, like any apartheid regime, including Jim Crow in the South or the nationalist government in South Africa, part of the abuse being perpetuated against Palestinians it involves a codification and legalization of double standards and abusive practices such as administrative arrest. That's like the most obvious one, which has been ongoing. And so to me, this interpretation of what's been going on as a legal dispute takes place within the framework of a legal system which is designed to create hierarchies and asymmetries between religious groups and different populations. And this push to see the law as neutral is extremely disturbing. I want to, and I'll try to keep it short. I have a tendency to go on a little bit. I want to point out that most of the really crappy things that have happened in history have been legal within the systems that they took place in. Apartheid was legal, and resisting apartheid was a crime in apartheid South Africa. In the same way that Jim Crow was the law, and resisting Jim Crow was breaking the law within the American South. And in that context, I think that we have to stop looking at simply the law as this neutral construct and to start looking at who wrote the laws and the kind of political logic which went behind the both the laws themselves and, of course, their implementation. So suffice it to say, based on that introduction, that I am not a representative of the Israeli right, and I look forward to hearing what other panelists have to say, and viewers and Adar have to say and to contribute on the subject.
Thank you, Avichai. Izzy, all you.
Hi, Hi, everyone. My name is Izzy Diab. I'm a Palestinian refugee by birth, currently living in Jordan. Both of my parents are Palestinian refugees from 1948 and 1967. They come from, my father comes from Haifa, village in Haifa. My mom comes from Yafa, both in what is now Israel proper. I will, in this panel, talk to my view as a refugee, as someone with parents who wanted nothing more than just being able to go back to where they call home, and how is that related to what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah. I think that's it for me in terms of an introduction. I'm looking forward to the debate here to maybe reach an agreement or not. Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Izzy. Aziz, what's up? You're muted.
Yeah. I mute myself because it's loud. I'm sitting outside. Well, my name is Aziz Abu Sarah. I'm a Jerusalemite, Palestinian, grew up in Jerusalem, and I've worked in dozens of countries on conflict resolution and on travel. I combine these two as well. I come from a background where I kind of experienced some of the stuff that people in Sheikh Jarrah have experienced, because it's not an isolated incident. And I think this is really important to say. People look at it as like, oh, well, it's a few families. How big of a deal it is? Well, it's a reality that Palestinians live again and again. I'll give you one example. I'm Jerusalemite from Jerusalem. I have a blue ID. We lived in El Azariya for a while growing up, which is 3 miles, 2.5 miles outside Jerusalem. Right next to us, there was a settlement. Yet the Israeli government decided that I'm not allowed to live in El Azariya, in Bethany, legally, while the settlers can. So we had to leave our home, which we still own, but we're not allowed to live in. And that's the case for everybody in Jerusalem who owns property in the West Bank. We are not legally allowed to live there. And if we do, we will lose access to Jerusalem. So somebody was asking about, give me an example of how there's unfairness in Jerusalem. This is one. I think Sheikh Jarrah is a continuation of the Palestinian catastrophe. It's the continuation of Nakba, of oppression of Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, who have no citizenship to any country, not to Israel, not to Palestine, who have no equal rights in the city. They can't vote to anyone. Israel won't allow us to vote for the PA and won't allow us to vote for the Knesset. This is a ridiculous reality that we live in. And people, I think, go on assuming, oh, well, it's all fine. It's a unified city. That is an absolute absurdity. And the displacement of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah is just a continuation of something that's been going on for quite a long time. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Aziz. Mossi.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I know few of you, and my name is Mossi. I'm a member of the Knesset. I'm on and off in the Knesset, and I'm peace activist. I was Secretary General of Peace Now in the 90s. I was founder of All for Peace Radio with my partner, Maisa Bransi Senior, and then I had the opportunity, the chance, the honor to meet Aziz Abu Sarah. And I'm activist. I am in Sheikh Jarrah in the last 12 years. Not every Friday, but in the last months, every Friday, and since 2009, so many Fridays. I feel that I don't really have to add because everybody here agrees. So let's speak. Of course, I agree basically with things that were said by Aziz and the others, and this is exactly what we want to change.
Thank you, Mossi. Muhammad, welcome. Wait, you're on mute? There we go. I unmuted you.
Yeah. Good evening.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, Adar, for being part of this. My name is Mohammed Dejani, and I'm the founder of the Wasatiyya movement in Palestine and the director of the Wasatiyya Academic Institute in Jerusalem. I live in Jerusalem. My family is a Jerusalemite family that has been in charge of the King David tomb since 1525 and until 1948. Between 48 and 67, the neighborhood fell in the no man's land, and then after 67, it was taken by the Israeli. And this is what I believe to be the continuing point, because when my parents left West Jerusalem, I was born in 46 in Al-Baqa, and then we had to leave, so we left everything behind, our home, our memories, our properties. So in 67, I think that it was an Israeli policy, official policy, to what I would not use the word Judaize Jerusalem, but I would like to say Israelize Jerusalem, because it is not about religion, but it's about politics and about control. And so it was an official Israeli policy to do so. So the names of the streets, even the tiles in the streets were changed in order to bring in the new realities. There has been books published about it, about this effort. This is the book about Judaization of Jerusalem that was published back in 96. And also this book about the Arabization of Jerusalem that was published in 2008. So basically, we are talking about taking over political control, and I see Sheikh Jarrah only as part of it, while in the often it is a governmental policy to do so, yet now the government is using the settlers in order to avoid being criticized abroad as a government for doing so. So the settlers take the name that they are taking over the neighborhoods, although legally and illegally, but it is really, in reality, it is a governmental policy. The government have realized that before they claimed that there is a Jewish majority in Jerusalem, in unified Jerusalem, but they realized that it's not true. Why? Because all the neighborhoods that has been annexed to Jerusalem are not really in Jerusalem, not really the true Jerusalem. Here, for instance, we can see David Roberts' paintings where Jerusalem that is being referred in the holy books is only the Jerusalem surrounded by the wall. So the effort before was to take control of the land outside the city, but then they realized that it is not Jerusalem, the true Jerusalem is within the walls of the city. So that's where the effort by the government and by the settlers is to really, whether legally or illegally, to take control. We have seen that. We personally have been engaged with this in Jaffa Gate, where the Atarot Kohanim settler movement took over properties there from the Greek Patriarchy in a shady deal, and we are fighting that in courts. First, the Greek Patriarchy went to court and lost, and then now the Atarot Kohanim is suing us as tenants of the Imperial Hotel to evict us from there, and also they are suing for 10 million shekels in back arrears since they took over the property. And so I see what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah as a continuation of a policy that is political policy. It's not religious. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with real estate. It has to do with politics and control of the city. So basically, that's how I see the situation in Sheikh Jarrah.
Thank you, Muhammad. So to our viewers, now that you got to know our panel a little bit better, you probably noticed that we don't have somebody clearly representing the right-wing position in Israel, which is the primary position. That being the case, I am going to do my best to ask questions and explain that position as well, because it's important that we understand the full range of spectrums when it comes to understanding the situation in Sheikh Jarrah. So just know my role here as the moderator is going to be to try to represent positions that aren't represented through a series of questions. I do see people in the chat are triggered. I see comments like, what about apartheid in Iran? I see people saying, what about Hamas? I recognize that this conversation is making you all uncomfortable. Sometimes it's hard to look in the mirror and acknowledge the wrongdoing of our nation. I accept that. If this truly makes you uncomfortable, you could just turn it off and stick your head back in the sand and pretend like everything's okay, but that's really not what we're about here. We're Israelis and Palestinians. We care about what's happening here more than we care about what's happening in Iran. We sometimes do talk about Hamas, but that's not the topic of today's conversation. So I'm sorry this makes you uncomfortable, but this is the conversation we're going to have. Now, when it comes to Sheikh Jarrah, right, Sheikh Jarrah used to be owned, that land was rightfully owned by Jews prior to 1948. Do the panelists, do you object to land returning to owners, to who owned it prior to 48 as a principle, or is it just that you object to it because the same law that is being applied that allows Jews to reclaim land from prior to 48 cannot be applied to Palestinians? So for example, the people currently being evicted from Sheikh Jarrah are also refugees from 1948, but they cannot return to their homes. They did not get that land back. So do you object to us returning land to rightful owners prior to 48, or is the objection just to the imbalance in the law?
You have answered
and
it.
Take this whoever.
You have answered it, because this is a double standard in the sense that you are applying this law only to Israelis or to Jews who owned property before 48, while and this you are discriminating against the Palestinians who owned property before 1948 in Israel, and so you are not applying this law on both sides. So that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I fully agree on with that, and to kind of contextualize what I saw happening within these protests. One of the things that was really remarkable to me during in the really unfortunate and disgusting episode that happened a few weeks ago, and let me just say I don't condone rockets being fired or Hamas or any of that in any way, but to people who are commenting things to that effect. So during when this whole thing was unfolding, I was sitting in my living room and there were sirens and all of this. And one of the things that I saw that really struck me as shocking was Israelis, kind of the pundits on Israeli TV going, how is the coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians and not Palestinians and Israeli Arabs, how is it suddenly breaking down? And they were pointing to places like Lod, right? Lod was an Arab village where massacres were carried out and where people were expelled in the 1948 war, right? Then shortly thereafter, not shortly thereafter, in 2010, the Jewish part of the city built a wall between themselves and where Palestinian and Arab Israelis were living, right? I mean, we are in a country now in Israel where the right wing, where we have Yisrael Smotrich getting on TV and asking us whether Arabs and Jews should be allowed to give birth in the same hospitals. We have Netanyahu getting up in 12 years of Netanyahu rule, where the prime minister gets up and says Israel is not a state for all of its citizens. That's a direct quote, maybe a word or two off. We have we're living in the age of the nation state law. We're living in the age of, we have Ayelet Shaked in 2014 informing us that there are only wars between people and that Palestinian mothers are raising little snakes and we should destroy their homes, or implying that we should. She was quoting someone else, so it wasn't her, as she later informed us. Right, so I think behind, again, as I said in my introduction, behind these discussions about the law, are these really coercive and really racist political dynamics which have been unfolding in Israeli politics, right? Like, this is not a neutral, sterile legal issue. In Sheikh, now today, over the last 2 days, we've had this flag march where Israelis, radical Israelis, I hope this doesn't represent everybody, are marching into East Jerusalem chanting death to Arabs. This is not a real estate dispute. This is a ethno-religious dispute in which one side is very clearly abusing the other. And by the way, for anybody who expected this to be a debate, I see people posting in this like, this isn't a debate, this isn't balanced. I have to say, people who are saying that are 100%. I think there seems to be a pretty broad consensus here. Anyway. Yes, so those are my thoughts. I'm also reading some responses as I'm speaking.
Yeah, can I just add, I'm reading some of these comments and I'm laughing because either these are professional commentators on complete BS, or I don't get it. It's like, oh, but Abbas funds terrorists. Let's be clear, President Abbas is the one who stopped people from protesting, coordinating security with Israel, guaranteeing security for Israel for the last 20 years, according to Israeli security services, which I understand all the Israelis commenting here don't seem to believe their own security services. They only believe what Bibi Netanyahu tells them. Yet the Palestinian Authority has done more for Israel's security than the Israeli security itself. And despite that, the Palestinian Authority has achieved nothing for Palestinians, stopping attacks on Israel since 2005, prisoning Palestinians, beating Palestinians in the streets last month, preventing them from reaching checkpoints to protest. And what did Abbas get in return? Nothing. Not a one piece of land more, not a statehood, nothing he's able to get in return. Actually, if you want to talk about Hamas, the only reason Hamas is popular is because people see that when Abbas said civil resistance, no more violence, that he got nothing. And people are tired of that. So if you want to weaken Hamas, you strengthen somebody who goes for diplomacy. What Israel has done is exactly the opposite. In the other way around, actually, it now promotes these kind of hate fests that happened in Jerusalem. This whole thing, oh, we condemn what Netanyahu said, or we condemn these Israelis going in Jerusalem saying death to Arabs. They were protected by the Israeli police. This is BS when people say, we condemn it. The Israeli police gave them the permit to go around my neighborhood in Jerusalem saying, we want to burn your villages, we want to burn Shafat, we want to burn you, we want to, it's amazing for a nation that has suffered the Nazis to go around say, we want to burn you. To me, that is just unbelievable that somebody would even say that. And then for whoever to say, oh, but we condemn it. What does we condemn it mean? It was under Israeli protection, under governmental protection. It was the Labor Party. Everyone's talking about this being leftist. I don't know who really, even the other side. There was the Labor Party who controls now the police, who was totally okay with this. Not even a one word of condemnation came from Merav Michaeli, who her, Omer Bar-Lev from her party, who runs the police department. So this is not a few individuals. This is a policy of the state of Israel that sees us as Palestinians as guests here, and slowly getting rid of us as quickly as possible. Why don't you get citizenship? They ask. By the way, you can't really get citizenship. Times of Israel 2016 published an article, 11 out of 1,100 who requested citizenship got it. So this whole, argument that people say, but you guys don't want peace. I have been doing ridiculous amount of reach out to Israelis, to Jews, not just in Israel and Palestine, all over the world. And I have no problem with either. But when it comes to government, and that's what we're talking about, when it comes to government policies in Israel is clearly continuation of removing Palestinians from this land, making our life so difficult that we end up either immigrating or leaving, as some of the people commenting here saying, go to Jordan, that's your country. That's absurd. My family has been in Jerusalem and Hebron for over 1,000 years. You're going to come and tell me, oh, because we've been here 2,000 years ago, your 1,000 years of living here doesn't mean anything. Get out of your home, go to Jordan. That's ethnic cleansing. That's absurd that somebody can say that and then in the same sentence say, but we would like to have peace with you. But could you please leave your home? What kind of absurdity is that?
Well, the other thing you have to realize, and I see somebody calling this propaganda, despite the fact that literally every word I say is substantiated by facts. So just do fact checking, and you'll realize that this is actually very empirically based. I invite you to do so. Anyway, regardless of that, though, I think also one of the things that really troubles me about this whole argument over who's the indigenous people of Israel and Palestine is that I don't really think that there's a objective racial basis to the idea that Israelis are indigenous and Palestinians aren't. They've done a lot of research on this, which I also encourage the haters here to look at. And genetically, Palestinians and Israelis have common roots. Our history in this land goes back thousands of years, not just Israeli, Jewish Israelis, not just Palestinian Muslims, but we have a shared history in this land. It's impossible to say that one people is more indigenous than the other. I don't think that there's an objective, and this is backed by research, which I encourage everybody to look at, but I don't think that there's an objective genetic basis for the conflict here. I think it's very much cultural, religious conflict, and I know that's among the most controversial things people could say about it, but they've also done the research, and the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. So,
go ahead.
Izzy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just I wanted to comment basically. One person, Noah Matto, said ethnic cleansing is you, Mr. Aziz, moving into houses of Jews in Sheikh Jarrah that were killed or kicked out by Jordan in 1948. Fine, they want those houses back. Give Palestinians their houses in West Jerusalem. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's a clear double standard in this situation, whereby Jewish Israelis can claim houses they owned in 1948, but Arab or Palestinian Israelis cannot do the same. What about the houses of my father and my mother? Am I allowed to lay claim to them? They lived there in 1948 and before for at least 1,000 years. Am I allowed to lay claim to them? Of course not. There's a clear double standard, and if you cannot see it, there's an issue with the way there's a tribalist issue in the way you look at things. Nuance is needed. You need to look at things with nuance. Nothing is as simple as you think it is. Nothing is as simple as the propaganda you referred to. There are a lot of factors to count, and when we talk about the issue of Sheikh Jarrah and many other issues, and every single time Sheikh Jarrah situation was put into discussion, it's always the case where Hamas and the PA is brought into the debate. The funny thing is that neither the PA nor Hamas were elected by Palestinians. But it's if you say that, nobody would accept that as an actual reality. And then those people who claim, they chose Hamas in Gaza and they chose the PA and whatever. But Isn't Israel the only democracy in the Middle East? Isn't Israel the only democracy where true political representation happens? If that's the case, then you cannot claim that Hamas and the PA were actually selected by the people. They weren't. Both of them are awful options. Both of them represent a dichotomy of the lesser of the two evil. You cannot talk about this, and I don't want to talk about Hamas too much. It always devolves to Hamas and the PA all the time. We're talking about the issue of Sheikh Jarrah, a Jerusalem issue that is affected by the Israeli law, and only the Israeli law, which the Arab Jerusalemites or the Palestinian Jerusalemites have no political power to change. And that's important to take into account.
Great, thank you. So to real quick represent the dominant Israeli position here on why there's an inequity in the law. So when you ask the question, why can't pre-48 Palestinians get their land back? And Israelis would say, why would we give Israeli land to people who do not recognize the state? Why would we weaken the state by giving land to those who essentially want to dismantle the state of Israel? It might not seem just, it might not be fair, but we care about our livelihood. We care about our life more than we care about our enemy's life. What do you say to Israelis? And this is the dominant position. The majority of Israelis are taking a similar position. What do you say to Israelis who are saying, we're not going to give Palestinians their land back. They don't recognize the state of Israel. We want to survive.
Can I comment on that as a pretty far left-wing Jewish person? Which is...
For sure, yeah.
Right. First of all, I think that it's always been ironic to me that many very staunch supporters of Israel are extremely nationalistic when it comes to their own countries and view the arrival of only a few immigrants as a huge threat to their culture and to their way of life. And this begs the question to me, of course, of, well, how would you then view Zionism, which was a movement predicated on moving hundreds of thousands of people into into a place where other people were living, specifically to claim it as your own and to threaten their culture, to threaten their language, and to threaten their way of life? It's a huge moment of hypocrisy to me. Now, that being said, and I think this is important, there are two things I think it's important to consider here. Which is, number one, if you're, and I say this with the warmest regard to the Palestinians who are on this panel, and I say this with the warmest regard to the Palestinian people and the abuse that they're continuing to suffer today. If you're, I would say two things. It's important to contextualize things in this discussion. The one is, if you're a Jewish person in 1948, or 1946 or whatever, and you've just had your whole family wiped out, and the international community, including the US, has sent you packing and sent you on your way. Were you in that situation, would you have chosen a nationalist independent solution to the problem? Or would you have chosen a internationally mediated, let's hope you treat us better, best time solution to the problem? So, despite the piles of criticism I've leveled against the right wing in this country, and really Zionism as a movement in general, I would say it's, to people, seeing the world through their eyes gives it a sense of nuance, which I think it's important to understand. Not that this justifies anything that's happening today. The second thing I would say, which makes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict so difficult, is the fact that many people in Israel today, as irony would have it, have nowhere else to go. They're ideologically, financially, physically dependent on the state of Israel. It's all they've ever known. It's all they've grown up in, despite the very coercive dynamic this has had towards Palestinians. And I think this is really what makes the conflict so complex and so difficult to solve is, well, you're all here now. Well, if you're Hamas and you're Iran, then the solution to that is, a few Scud missiles or whatever you plan on launching at Tel Aviv. If you're Israel, if you're a right-wing Israeli, the solution is very simple. It's to continue colonization and continue ethnic cleansing. But if you're the people in the middle, we're kind of the ones who get the most. We're kind of the ones without a home because we don't know. It's hard. It's hard to solve the problems this has created, and that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and that I think it's very important for people who care about human rights to think about as well.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to the security concern? And I'm going to keep emphasizing this point because the reason we see a divide between Israel's becoming more isolated in the international community in many ways, because the international community says, I'm going to value both sides equally. They need equal rights. There's no reason to think otherwise. But again, Jews living here, the majority of them will always go back to, I care about my security, more about the rights of my enemy. I'm not going to change my mind on that. If we can't respond to the security concern of Israelis, we're not going to change their minds. The right will continue to grow. This will continue to be the dominant position. So I really want us to continue to address this point.
So Adar, I think there's an assumption in the question that Palestinians either hate Jews, want to destroy, want to kill. And I think that assumption is something maybe people fed through their education because of previous conflicts. I don't believe that's a reality. I don't believe that's true. Being in Jerusalem, being around the West Bank, being around Palestinian friends, that's not what we live and dream about. We're not living for a cause of let's kill all the. That's not what our life is about. So I'll start with that. But the second thing, for Israel to have security, it has to address the injustices against Palestinians. You're not going to have a full security as you are occupying millions of Palestinians. You're not going to have full security when people are losing their homes. You don't have full security when people have to shut their shops. Somebody said, oh, it's a democracy. People, I don't want to stop them from saying death to Arabs because it's democracy, even if it's horrible. Well, but to give that right, you had to shut down shops. And that right doesn't exist for Palestinians. People who carry a Palestinian flag in Jerusalem yesterday were arrested. So either there's a democracy for all of us or not. Don't give me that argument, oh, well, it's all about democracy. It's not. It's an oppression. And Israel will not get its security without freeing the Palestinian people. I think it goes hand in hand. Just like understand also for us, for Palestinians, we also wanting freedom, it comes hand in hand with creating security for both, for us and for Israeli Jews together. It's not one side winning. And I think the way the government is working right now is it's either us or them. And I don't buy that argument. I don't think your security means I'm not free or my freedom means you'll be less secure. I think it goes exactly the opposite. If I'm free, you will have 10 times more security than when I'm oppressed.
I completely agree with Aziz here. The issue is an issue of civil liberties and human rights. Once Palestinians, by and large, in the land are granted those rights, security becomes the direct outcome for both people, not just Jewish Israelis, but also for Palestinian people. There's a lot of questioning about, how secure or not the Israelis would feel, and nobody asks the question for Palestinians as well. And right now they don't feel secure. Right now they are in survival mode, which does not really help. It doesn't help in building bridges of trust. If you want to build bridges of trust, if I, as a Palestinian, I'm constantly being oppressed, why would I be given anyone or my oppressor the trust that things will go better as long as I comply? It doesn't work that way. Oppression breeds frustration. Frustration breeds fear and violence. Once that is sorted, I sometimes wonder at the logic of the Israeli government, whereby we can only preserve the security of Jewish Israelis by oppressing Palestinians more and more. Did that ever prove fruitful? Across the 70 years of this conflict, did that ever prove fruitful? No. And it will never prove fruitful. And as long as there's bad faith, as long as there's, people coming in, especially, I'm talking about the Israeli government, coming in bad faith, assuming that all Palestinians want is to hurt and harm Israeli Jews, there will never be a space for actual meaningful conversations. Give people the space to live in prosperity. Give Palestinians the space to live in prosperity, and things will change. But the problem is, people are coming, the Israeli state is coming in bad faith, believing that even if that happens, security of the Israeli Jews will still be an issue.
Well,
thanks.
Adar,
Go ahead, Mohammed.
You raised the question about security. The question for that is how to achieve security. Now, do you achieve it by having the people you live with and who live next to you, by making them lose hope and making them become desperate, or by trying to coexist with them and try not to push your military power in order to gain political power, in the sense that so you live around people living in frustration, and as a result to them, the only way is violence. So I don't believe that here coexistence can take place, and there should be coexistence in Jerusalem, because this is a city that has been for thousands of years. It is an Abrahamic city. All the three religions are attached to this city. And this is what the Israeli government needs to recognize. It needs to recognize the rights of the other, whether Christian or Muslim or secular, to live in Jerusalem and to protect that right. Because so far they are not protecting the rights of Christians and Muslims to live in Jerusalem. And this policy, that is, whether it is done through governmental policy right on, or by supporting indirectly settler movements within the city, eventually will fire back, because there are more than 300,000 Palestinians living in Jerusalem. What do you want to do with them? You want to wipe them out? You want to throw them out? No matter what policy you do, you will not evict them. You will not erase them. You will not ethnic cleansing them. So that's why it is very important to think in the other way, in the way of how to coexist together and make Jerusalem as a model for a peaceful city. Because I don't think that, if you think that the international community is looking at Sheikh Jarrah and thinking, oh, this is a settlement extremist right-wing movement trying to take Palestinian property. No, they're not thinking that way. They're thinking this is an Israeli Jewish effort to ethnic cleanse the Palestinians. And that's why you tend to find, even before the Gaza bombing, that there was a lot of sympathetic views within the international community regarding the Sheikh Jarrah episode. And that's why I believe that for Israel to really have good security is for it to adopt a policy of peaceful coexistence between the Abrahamic faiths in Jerusalem.
Yeah, I'm honestly a little bit more cynical about things. And I think that what I have to say might address some of the comments I'm reading in the sidebar, or perhaps not. So I think the Israeli, there have been experiences within Israel that have really pushed Israelis away from peace, and towards this kind of zero-sum logic vis-a-vis Palestinians. And these things have been, the Second Intifada, obviously, then the disengagement from Hamas, from Gaza, and this has really pushed Israeli society to a point where you don't see Israeli politicians asking, "What can we do to have peace with the Palestinian people anymore?" You hear them asking, "What can we do to stay safe?" And that's really where we are, where we've gotten to. And to me, I think the solution always has been and is now more than ever not to be found between political groups of the two parties, but really from the international community to take ownership of this conflict and to take responsibility for it, and to take responsibility for ending it and for putting pressure on different parties, namely the Israeli right and extremist Palestinian factions such as Hamas, to end it. I think that's really where the solution is, because at the end of the day, Israel is extremely dependent on the United States for support. And, there needs to be a point where the huge piles of weapons and ammunitions and support become conditional on basic respect for human rights. On the Israeli end, and also on Hamas's end. I mean, let's not deny the fact that Hamas is a genocidal organization which now rules a significant number of Palestinians, whether elected or not. They're the ones who represent the sovereignty of Gaza, and they have genocide written into their constitution, and that's very disturbing. And I think that it would be a bit naive. I think it would be a bit, naive to give them more credit than they're due. This is, an organization which has committed any number of atrocities and continues to do so, and much to the detriment of the people living in Gaza, as well as to Israelis for that matter. And I think that the real solution, to me, the solution to this conflict comes, people Jewish people as well, many Jewish people, but also regular people, and especially, Muslims living in democratic countries, wake up to the reality every day that their governments are supporting what the Israeli government is doing and supporting it financially and looking the other way. Let's not, human rights violations are happening all over the world, of course, but I don't think that there are any human rights violations which are as unequivocally supported by democratic liberal governments as what's happening, unfortunately, in Israel, Palestine. And people are, I think that seeing as Zionism as a movement was driven by European anti-Semitism and was driven by the lack of ownership taken by European countries for traditional anti-Semitism, I think it's also time for them to take a bit more responsibility for things and look the ugly truth in the eyes, and say, look, and say we need to resolve this conflict, and say we need to create a solution which is livable for Palestinian people and for Israeli people, for everybody living between the river and the sea, and to, if not remedy, at least to mitigate the worst things that are happening, right? At least to prevent the rockets, at least to prevent what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, at least to prevent the continued colonization of the West Bank. I think that that's the minimum that Western democratic governments, including and especially the U.S., have today. People talk about resolving the conflict. I'm not sure if the conflict can ever be resolved. There are too many memories, too much bitterness, too much, but at least we can stop the worst of it, and at least we can put some stitches on the worst of the bleeding, which is happening continuously in this region. And I think if the conflict can't be resolved, at least we should try to freeze it. At least we should try to prevent it from, if we can't. I've worked with little kids. If you can't get them to shake hands and make up, at least you can hold them apart so that they're not, smashing each other anymore. I think that maybe should be a more realistic aspiration than some of the previous peace efforts that have been attempted.
Yeah.
Thank you. Izzy, I will let you go next. We are closing in on an hour. I do want to start taking audience questions, so chat, feel free to ask questions. We're obviously going to prioritize super chats. And to our guests, you see that some of the chats are quite extreme, not so open-minded. But as you've also seen, many comments give us an opportunity to expand on certain points. They kind of like pitch a ball and then we can hit it. So that's the benefit of the comment, but don't let it get to you. The people who are acting hateful, they're all sitting there with not showing their real name, not showing their real picture, not courageous enough to come and have a conversation on air. They're keyboard warriors that just happen to come every single week. They spend hours consuming Sulha content. At the end of the day, they're still here. They're still listening. And I appreciate the fact that you all are here. But panelists, don't let them get to you. Anyways, one more thing that we often hear on the Israeli side, it's that no one is actually evicting these families. They're just saying they need to pay rent. Why not just pay rent and stay? So what's the response to that?
Well, there are a few responses to that, but the first one, which is really actually important to start with, there was a story in Haaretz yesterday about the former Israeli, I think, Attorney General, who found out that his family owned one of those houses in Sheikh Jarrah, but they were never contacted to tell them it's your family. So it goes to this non-profit or organizations that's their goal isn't about, oh, we need to give those homes to the previous owners. That's not really their goal. Their main goal is we need to bring Jews who are extreme right-wingers. I actually took a tour with the settlers in Sheikh Jarrah. They didn't know I was a Palestinian because I believe in this aspect of understanding the other's narrative. I would encourage all these guys commenting here to do that, whether Israelis or Palestinians or whichever you support. Don't only read what you agree with. For those of you upset there's no other narrative, maybe it's good. You can hear a narrative you haven't heard before. But I took this tour and I went to one of these settlers' homes and I talked to the owner and I asked him, are you building relationship with your neighbors? And his response was, very sweet guy, American, moved to Israel, feeling he's fulfilling God's mission for himself. And he said, I would, but then they know that my plan or our plan is to eventually evict all of them. So they don't want to be my friends because they know I don't want them to be here. So the issue isn't about paying rent. The issue isn't even the original owners. This is an organization that their goal, they said, is to stop two-state solution is through building settlements within Jerusalem that dividing it becomes impossible, and their goal to bring ideological Jews who are very right-wing, who actually would not, ironically, if they in power, you wouldn't have much more rights than me, probably, if you're secular or liberal. That's their goal. So giving them rent, playing that game, eventually you end up losing, because then they are landlords and they can evict you whether you pay rent or not. It's an issue of principle. The United Nations and Jordan asked those families to give up their right to go back to their homes in West Jerusalem or in Haifa when they took these homes. This was a resettlement plan that was approved by the UN. So when people say, oh, but it is legal by Israeli courts, not everything legal by Israeli court is ethical. 99.7%, 99.7% of Palestinians who go before Israeli courts are convicted. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. So I think that's what we have to remember, that it's just not an issue of just, oh, what's the legal aspect, just pay rent. It's much more than that. And that's the problem. It's not only also Sheikh Jarrah, it's Silwan, it's Wadi Joz. There's multiple other neighborhoods we're not even going into right now.
I would like to say something here, which is, I'll keep it simple. If it was just a rent issue, I'd pay the rent. I'd find people who would pay the rent. I would put some of my paycheck to keeping these people in their houses, and I think there are plenty of people in the world who would. I really don't think this is a rent issue, and I think people who are presenting it as such are ridiculous. Just ridiculous. Let's move on. Yeah, and I think
real quick.
Go ahead.
Just real quick, because we got a super chat from Rajia. Hold on, it's delayed. My internet's not working so well today. There you go. Rajia, our one and only champion member. Thank you so much for the €5 super chat. Love Sulha. So interesting and informative. I wish I could join more live shows. Rajia, you can come back on the show. Reach out to me. We'll set it up. Avichai, finish what you're saying, and then I want to give it over to Izzy. I know she's been meaning to say something.
Yeah. So this goes to what I was saying originally about how you can't just see law as this neutral process. Laws are written by people. They're politicized. They're written. They exist in, and they're written and they're implemented in a certain political setting, in a certain political context. Right, like the fact that the law is written in a way which makes it extremely difficult for Palestinians to remain in their homes in East Jerusalem, whereas Jews from anywhere in the world can move there, is clearly built around the idea of ethnic replacement. Right, it's about like what the occupation of the West Bank has essentially done is created the barrier between the West Bank and Israel as a sort of one-way valve where we pump as many Jews into this area, and increasingly, obviously, Palestinians can't go the other way, and increasingly marginalized Palestinians living within the West Bank. That's a political logic of it. That's why these laws were written. That's been their outcome. That's the way they've been implemented. And let's stop pretending, as I said in the beginning, every terrible thing in history, most of the terrible things in history that have happened against minorities have been legal. Jim Crow was legal. Apartheid was legal, right? Breaking apartheid was illegal. That's the world that we're living in here. It's a world in which the laws have been written to accomplish political ends, and those political ends are fundamentally illiberal and fundamentally abusive, coercive, and colonialist. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
Izzy.
What I want to say is basically along the lines of what Avichai, is this how you say your name? And
Avi
Aziz,
is easier.
Avi, okay. Along the same lines that Aziz and Avi are saying, there are laws, Israeli laws that are made to disenfranchise the Palestinian constituency or the Arab constituency in Jerusalem. That's a clear case. And you cannot dispute it. There are facts supporting this. And again, I will mention again that the law where someone who had or owned land prior to 1948 can claim it back only applies to Jewish Israelis. If you don't see a problem with that, there's an issue. I mean, just switch the roles for a second and tell me how you wouldn't see an issue with it. You will definitely see an issue with Palestinians claiming houses they owned in 1948, while Jewish Israelis cannot. there is a clear case of disenfranchisement here. And this is not the only example of what's going on, especially in Jerusalem, to push the Arab constituency out of Jerusalem and replace it with a Jewish constituency. It's as clear as the sun, and this issue needs to be dealt with. And the tragedy of it all is that the Arab constituency in Jerusalem does not have any political weight to represent itself. There is a power dynamic that favors Israeli Jews over the Arab Palestinian constituency in Jerusalem. And again, that's an issue where we can talk about, often the debates go around, also devolve around discussing whether it's ethnic cleansing or apartheid or genocide or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. I call it morally wrong, morally corrupt.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line of it all.
Can I respond to I wanted to respond specifically to a comment.
I want to give Aziz and Muhammad the opportunity, and then we'll bring it back to you. If they don't have nothing to say right now, then go for it.
Muhammad, you can go first if you have something.
You're just Muhammad, you're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
I unmuted you.
Okay. I'd like to stress that this is not a matter of paying rent, because first the question is, how come that these people woke up yesterday and discovered that they have houses and they want the rent? So it is not about the rent. Paying the rent is a recognition of the ownership, which is being contested, because even the papers they have, it is questionable that they have this proprietorship over these paper. And Jordan and the lawyers have advised the people not to deal with the settlers, because the minute they deal with the settler in any way, then they lose their rights, and then the settlers will be recognized as owners of a property they do not have the right to. So basically, it is questionable whether the papers these people have are legitimate, because even the Jordanians say they are not. And the lawyers are saying for the people, do not pay rent, do not recognize these settlers, because once you recognize them, you give them the legal right to evict you. And that's part of the problem that these people face within the proprietorship issue of these, like what happens in Java Gate. And in Java Gate, the contracts that these people have are shady. They were part of a shady deal with a corrupt patriarch. And so it is not really legal, yet the courts approved it. And this is part of the problem, where the legality is being questioned, whether it is really legal or not. We do not believe it is. This is part of the problem.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just add, again, this is not a Sheikh Jarrah issue. This is not a few houses issue. Somebody here in the comments said, build a new neighborhood in Jerusalem. Wonderful. Since 1967, how many new neighborhoods and settlements have been started in Jerusalem, all for Jewish residents? Pisgat Ze'ev, Gilo, Nave Yaakov. I can go on and on to mention all these new neighborhoods. They were not built for the Arab Palestinian residents. In contrast, what happened, Palestinians were not giving permits to build. Since 1967, just about 5,000 to 6,000 permits for houses were given to build, forcing us to build illegally. And then people can come, like some of the commentators here, and say, but you build illegally, you have to get your house demolished. Oops, sorry, we won't give you a permit, but you can't also build legally or illegally. No rezoning of East Jerusalem, no rights whatsoever. So that's the issue. And then you look at Silwan. You have 88 homes are threatened to be demolished because of this issue. You have other homes within Silwan, Batn al-Hawa neighborhood that supposedly all would be evicted. where 1,100 people live there. It's not a rent issue at all. Then you have Wadi Joz, where a whole neighborhood is supposed to be destroyed, industrial zone where people work, have their jobs, have been doing, since I grew up in Wadi Joz, this is an area I know very well. People have their shops since I was born. It's the same shops. Actually, many Israelis go to fix their cars there. And yet, the Israeli government now wants to destroy that area, that neighborhood. So this is not about Sheikh Jarrah. When we say this is a policy, I don't look at, if there was 2-3 homes, I could be like, okay, I get it. Maybe it is a dispute over rent. But this is not 2-3 houses. This is not even 100 or 200 houses. This is about a policy that openly in the past has said, our goal is to keep Jerusalem a Jewish city. That is a stated policy by the Israeli government, that we have to push Palestinians outside the borders of the city. That is a stated thing by the Israeli government. I didn't come up with that. And for some of the people here saying, well, what about the Jews who came from Arab countries and lost their property? I support your right to ask for compensation for that, or to ask for being able to go and get your homes back. I don't think I stand only for supporting Palestinians being able to have that right. I think if you were in Egypt and Egypt kicked you out, yeah, you should go. I'm not Egyptian. I didn't do it to you. Well, my mother is, so maybe I'm a little part of that. But you should be able to go and ask for rights. If you were in Morocco, actually the Moroccan government now is starting to make changes to allow some of that recourse to happen, unlike in Israel. If you were in Tunis, go ahead and go. And for the person who's saying go to other Middle Eastern country and mentioning Afghanistan, obviously you don't live in their area. Afghanistan is not part of the Middle East. I've worked there. Definitely not a Middle Eastern country, not an Arab country. That's all right. We can all learn new things in this conversation. But yeah, when you write the stuff like go to other countries, you support ethnic cleansing, so you're not part of really this conversation. If you don't believe in human rights, I think this conversation is not really interesting for you, regardless if you're Arab, if you're Jewish. I think human rights should apply for everyone. Rules should be equal for everyone. By the way, whether somebody said, but if you're not a citizen, I was born in Jerusalem. What do you mean if you're not a citizen? What do I do? I was born in a city that Israel claimed it's equal and it's for everybody and it's unified. And yet, I did not live growing up in that reality. It wasn't equal for me at any point growing up in every aspect. Whether it's from school, where my school would get 1/10 of the budget of a Jewish school, and then they wonder, oh, why is education in the Palestinian side of Jerusalem is not as good? We pay taxes the same as people in West Jerusalem, but we don't get the same benefits. Taxation, without representation, because we also don't have representation as well. So this is, you can't look at it as just Sheikh Jarrah. It is a whole policy of a government to tame, displace, keep a smaller community in East Jerusalem as much as possible. I think that's the goal.
Thank you, Aziz. Anybody have to chime in, or could we take more audience questions?
Can I ask one question to Aziz that's been interesting me throughout? Because you've once or twice explained that this is part of this broader displacement policy by the Israeli government. Why did this specific incident spark such an outrage then? Why was it this moment in time that created this resistance? Why not 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or 5 years in the future?
Right. I think one is a lot of these things have been happening, increasing the house demolitions, the Silwan, Wadi Joz is a new thing. So I think more Palestinians in East Jerusalem realized, oh, this is not just a Sheikh Jarrah fight. This is the whole community fight. And today it's Sheikh Jarrah, tomorrow it'll be Ras Al Amud, the day after it'll be Al Isawiya. This is it. But also the timing, I think, was important. One, coronavirus kind of helped in the sense, people were home for a long time and it gave the time for people to be more active. And the second thing, it happened in Ramadan. And this probably is the biggest mistake of what the Israeli government did. Ramadan, people always gather in the evenings. We are more in solidarity with each other. People will go to the mosque in the evening and everybody will gather. And so by happening in Ramadan, people already feel like gathering together. So it was easier to be in Sheikh Jarrah every evening doing iftar together. And that brought the larger Palestinian community. And then you add to it, the last thing is when the Palestinians in the Galilee were coming, or in the Triangle, were coming to Jerusalem to show solidarity, and the Israeli government stopped them, the Israeli police stopped them in close by Abu Ghosh, and they got off the buses and walked toward Jerusalem. Palestinians in East Jerusalem decided to go and pick them up in their own cars. And that created a solidarity that we have not had probably in, I don't remember when we had such a solidarity between us in East Jerusalem and Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship. So you add all these things together, it kind of gave us a community that we were not used to it. And it's important to also add, this protests and this movement that has came out of what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah was not led, not by Hamas, not by Fatah, and not by Jabha. None of the political parties were involved. None of them really even knew what was going on. And by the time they figured out what was going on, there was a movement that was going around young leaders who nobody knows them in the political realm. And that's what's so inspiring for me about what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah.
Thank you, Aziz. Real quick, another super chat. Julian Meltzer, brother, he goes, peace is the journey we are on. We all arrive. Thankful for Sulha. Thankful for brave people on both sides who have compassion for the other side. Julian, thank you for the 18 shekel. And for those who don't know, Julian is actually an awesome activist in Tel Aviv. He has an organization called Clean the Butts, which aims to clean the world of cigarette butts. He does amazing work. His organization has cleaned up, I think, over 1 million butts the past 2 years or so, and still going strong. So you can find them on Instagram and Facebook and all the social media platforms. Thank you, Julian.
We're all, I just wanted to point out, we're all very busy people. If we're peace activists in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're going to be busy for a long time. Izzy is studying sustainability. So with global warming, she's going to be busy for a long time. And your friend is cleaning up cigarettes in Tel Aviv. So he's going to be busy for a very, very, very long time. So God bless us all.
Yeah, I hope that Israel-Palestine activism is something I could retire from sooner rather than later, right? I'd gladly not do this if I didn't have to, but you know, we'll see. We're doing our best. We have a question from Adi Harongi for Aziz. Thanks for the question, Adi. He goes, have the Palestinians in Jerusalem always sought Israeli citizenship from the government?
No, Palestinians in Jerusalem are, I would argue, divided about that. Some do and some don't. But not many do now because they know the chances of them anyway getting it is very small. So not many will go to apply. So we don't really know how many Palestinians would apply. I think most Palestinians see it very practical. We live here. Our first commitment is to staying in our homes. That's our number one commitment. Getting Israeli citizenship means you might be able to not be thrown out. You know, if you're a Palestinian resident and you go to live abroad for work, or you get an opportunity in Dubai to work there for 5 years, you would lose your right of coming back to Jerusalem if you do that. So my Israeli neighbor can go to the States and study for 5 years and work there and get a high-tech job, but a Palestinian does not have the same opportunity, because the moment you leave the country, you are told if you don't come back within a certain amount of time, it's anywhere between 3 to 7 years, depending on reality of that moment, you lose your right of having that opportunity. And that, again, increases the chances of poverty, lack of education. So many Palestinians would probably apply for it. I asked somebody when I was in Jerusalem, I don't have Israeli citizenship. I asked somebody when I was in Jerusalem who applied for it, and I said, how is it going? And he applied for it a year ago. And he said he got a date at the Ministry of Interior to go and get an interview, and it's in 3 years. 3 years before you get your first interview. So the reality is, and I understand it, Israel doesn't want Palestinians in East Jerusalem to have citizenship, because if they do, they'll vote. And if they vote, they might change the balance of government. And even though, you know, the Arabs, they have now 10 seats in the Knesset, it's not really that influential. Even if they get 20 seats, it's not that influential. It still terrifies politicians of giving rights even to those in Jerusalem. Forget the West Bank and forget Gaza. Even to those in Jerusalem, giving them that citizenship is terrifying.
Thank you, Aziz. This is a question for the panel. Then we'll move to final thoughts. Thanks, Chen Fro. Goes, do you think Ram Party and Mansour Abbas will do anything for East Jerusalem Palestinians, or is it not something they ever claim is their issue because of technicalities? So essentially, will Ram help the situation in East Jerusalem? Are the panelists hopeful of that?
I'm happy to take it on, but if somebody else wants to, since I just talked, I can step back. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that, I mean, to maintain the balance within a coalition government, some compromises might be made. And I'm not sure, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the politics of Israel proper and how Ram Party is part of it. But as far as my reading is concerned, I think there will be a political game to be played. What that entails in terms of compromises, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll add, I guess. Well, I'll start with, I don't think religious parties should be in politics, but that's my personal views. I don't like mixing the two. So that's I'll probably disagree with Ram and quite a few things coming from a more liberal point of view myself. But I would say their goal is clearly to make some change for certain communities, that they're voter communities, and I understand that, within Israel. I don't see them really throwing the whole coalition to push for changes in Jerusalem. When they made their coalition agreement, their requests was about certain villages in the Negev, recognizing 3 villages in the Negev, which means they'll get finally electricity and water and schools. They wanted more budgets for the Arab towns and villages and investment there. They wanted commitment that the police will actually tackle crime. Those were their priorities. Jerusalem, unfortunately, did not seem to be one of those priorities. I hope they'll have even a little bit of a say, since the government could fall if they don't support it, but I'm not holding my breath.
Thank you, Aziz. So we're closing in on an hour and a half. We'll go in a circle. Everyone can share their final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up.
If I may, I think the issue of Sheikh Jarrah, as far as the facts are concerned, is not a real estate dispute. It's part of a bigger issue, and it's not just Sheikh Jarrah. It's the entirety of East Jerusalem, and in that sense, it's an issue of the constant disenfranchisement of the Arab, Israeli or Palestinian constituency in East Jerusalem, and that's clear from the facts. I want to end on the thought based on the comments that I've read, whereby Israelis are throwing at me the questions of why should we trust you, when did Palestinians ever coexist with Israelis, and questions like that. The issue with questions like that is that I can easily turn that question to you and ask you, should I trust you? When did you ever coexist with Palestinians? And we will never get anywhere. And so I don't like to answer these questions. Yes, Avi, you want to say something?
Well, I think we can answer that question. And we could say, when did people in this country coexist better? And when did Jews and people in the within the Arab world coexist together? The answer is very clearly before this started happening, before the displacement of Arabs from their homes started happening. That's exactly when it was, because There were centuries of not perfect coexistence, but certainly much better than what we have today. And the idea that it was always like this, that it always had to be like this, and that there aren't very specific things that happened which drove these two communities apart, it flies in the face of history.
Yeah, can I add to that, Avihai? Izzy, you want
to? No, I have to leave in a bit. I just wanted to thank the panelists on this episode, and I look forward to continued conversations with everyone here. And I hope, against hope, that anybody who's viewing this from one side will actually look into what the other side is dealing with. And for me, this is the way forward, the nuance, having the empathy, and looking at things with an eye of realism is needed. And I hope that happens at one point. Thank you very much.
Adar, could you connect us after?
Thank
I don't think
Izzy.
I have Izzy's or Avichai's
sure.
email.
Sure.
So I would love to stay in touch already. I'm in touch with Muhammad and Mossi. If I might say, I fully agree with what you say, Izzy, and maybe I'll end with something positive. Look, I own a business, a travel business, with a Jewish partner. We co-own this business for now 10 years and more, 11-ish years. We hire Israelis and Palestinians who we treat equally. We pay in an equal level. Tour guides who we do the same with. It's a travel business. And it is possible. When we started, Scott and I, this business, people looked at us, some Arabs came and told me, how can you trust him? He's a Jew. And Jews went to him and said, how can you trust him? He's an Arab. Some of my staff get all the time those kind of questions. How could you work with them? And we able to do it. We able to give the both narratives in our tours. We able to have these tough conversations. We disagree, we agree with each other, but we able to create a new reality. So yeah, we can sit and claim and fight and say, well, we can never trust each other. I know, for me, my business partner, who I said is Jewish, he's like my brother. And whether we can yell at each other and fight with each other, and at the end we'll meet and hug it out, and we trust each other with our finances, we trust each other with our families, we trust each other in everything. And that gives me a little hope, and I hope more of those kind of things happen. To me, it's crazy that those kind of partnerships are not more common in Israel. Talking about what can be done to make a change. This is how you build relationships, not by hiring Arabs to be your cleaners, not by evicting people from their homes. That's not how relationships happen. Equality is really important in making change and creating trust. And just like Scott and I have been able to do it through our business, I think this can be taken into into larger communities as well. We can recreate that reality on the ground and start meeting each other every day. When two of my guides, an Israeli and a Palestinian, guide together for 10 days, by the end of it, yeah, they argued probably quite a bit, they disagreed and stuff, but they living literally together from morning till night, they're sleeping in the same place, they get to talk, they get to know each other. And that changes everything. Instead of all this, I read in the news that you are evil. I was told that Arabs always hate Jews. I was told that Jews want to kill all Arabs. That's not the reality when you get to know people.
Thank you, Aziz. It's been a great pleasure having you. Muhammad.
Yeah, I believe we have to work on coexistence. I used to go to parks and see young kids, Palestinians and Israeli, playing together without recognizing that they come from different religious or ethnic backgrounds. And so, same thing when Israelis used to come to my house, and they will bring young kids with them, and then they, with my nephews, used to go on the computer and play together. And so when I was looking at the young women who were chanting death to Arabs, or were so that we or ban them or whatever they used to chant in hatred. I think it is, and these are not the young kids the young boys or girls who played in the park. They are, this is education. And that's why coexistence needs education. We need to stress on education and on socialization so that we can, when we tell these people it is wrong to chant death to Jews, it is the same thing we have to understand. It is wrong to say death to Arabs, and or even to say death to anyone. And that's why I believe that we need to focus on the educational institutions, on the curriculum, on teaching teachers how to be moderate in order that we can have a moderate culture and be able to live together in peace, particularly in the city of peace. And that's why we have to work on it. It is not something that we are born with it, but hatred is something we learn. And that's why it is we have to learn how to love each other. And if we don't want to love each other, at least how to live with each other.
Thank you, Muhammad. Avichai. You're on mute.
I would say for me, as a Jewish person, I grew up surrounded by narratives of how much Jewish people have suffered. And I think that there are two lessons, two possible directions to take the lessons of that suffering and of that pain and of the abuse that we've suffered, which one of which is to say, one of which is tolerance and liberalism, and to say, I never want other people to experience abuse. And the other is to say, fine, as long as it's not me. There's no transitive property of suffering. There's no way that something wrong that somebody did to me justifies the wrong I can do to somebody else. There's no balancing of that equation. It doesn't happen. And we need to, something that was very interesting to me was when, over the summer, when Israel and the UAE normalized relations, and a number of other countries in the Muslim world either have or are in the direction of doing that. We call this the Abraham Accords, right? We say all of a sudden we remembered the common ideological connection that we have, that we always have had. We have to remember, people who want peace and people who insist on peace and demand peace have to remember that it wasn't always like this. And I think that one of the key ways in which oppression is always justified is to paint the world in a light where oppression will always be necessary. We are always it can't be different, but we know it has been. We know it has been. We know there were times in this country where in this part of the world, not just in Israel, but throughout the Middle East, when Jewish people and Muslim people did coexist and considered themselves partners and neighbors and loved each other in a flawed way, but in a very real way. And my only message is, my message to myself, my message to everybody is, it doesn't have to be this way. Religion and God and our land don't have to be things that we cut up into little pieces and try to grab away from each other. They can be something that we can share and something that we can enjoy from mutually. And I'm happy to sit in a room of so many people who seem to believe the same thing that I believe, which is ultimately that we need to look the demons of what's happened and of what we've done and of what we've been a part of in the eyes and to address it. I'm an Israeli citizen. I moved here. I served in the army. If the abuse of Palestinians is like a company. I own a stock in that company. I own some small fraction of what's happened. And I don't look away from that. And I don't pretend anything else. And the compassion and the affection that I have for you as people is extremely deep. And I hope that we'll see better days and days that look a lot more like the time that came before this particular chapter in Jewish-Muslim relations in this country and really and throughout the world as well.
Thank you so much, Avichai. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to stay on for another 10, 15 minutes just to share reflections. I know there's been some feedback the chat's given. I'm going to speak to the chat as well for those who have been most troubled today, because I do care about what you think as well. To our guests, Avichai, Izzy, Aziz, and Muhammad, it's been a real pleasure. I'd love to have you all back on again, so let's stay in touch. For those watching, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And this panel was actually put together super last minute. I don't even have the contact information of everybody in the description right now, but I'm going to get it. Can all the panelists please send me how people can reach you if they want to get in touch with you? For anyone watching this after the live stream, it's going to be down there. If you want to get in touch with our guests, check the description. I'm sure they'd be happy to engage with you. Yeah, and that's it. I'm going to stay on for 15 minutes. I'm running to the bathroom real quick. I hope you all stick around because I'd love to chat. Bye, panel. That was great.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Cool. Panel, chat, I hope you guys stick around. I'm going to be back very soon. Give me like one. Okay. Thank you for whoever stuck around. I see only around 20 of you left. You're lost. Okay. Cool. So that was nice. I do know that a lot of this wasn't an easy panel for a lot of people because I see the comments. So first of all, about this specific panel. It wasn't easy putting it together. We postponed this a few times just because we couldn't find the right panelists. I went into it intentionally not bringing in somebody who I thought would be very inflammatory, because I know it's a challenging issue, and because we were having 6 panelists, I didn't want it to get in a full-blown fight. That's true. That is my bias, me saying I acknowledge that there is a right and wrong here. I would like a panel on it, but I don't want any far-right super inflammatory positions. That being said, we were meant to have an Israeli guest who is certainly right of center, who canceled last minute. Unfortunately, he couldn't come. I did my best to try to bring up the arguments of the right. I know many may feel like that didn't suffice, but that's just a little bit about the panel and why it was like that. Now, in terms of, I see some people saying that this channel is like a left-wing this or a left-wing that. So, first of all, just so you know, I get critique that I bring on too many right-wingers as well. What I've noticed more and more when I do this is people who are extremely biased view the world in a very skewed way. They view fairness as bias in a sense. Now, I'm not saying we've had equal representation across the board, but if we look at the right-wingers we've had on, we've had both the Fleischers on, Malka and Yishai Fleischer. Yishai's been on twice. We recently had Mordechai Ishyamini, who's a pretty far-right settler. We had Mordechai Kedar on. We've had Inon Dan Kehati, who's certainly, maybe he's a centrist, but he's a Jewish nationalist. We've had Rudy on 5 times, who's also a Jewish nationalist. Someone even made the case to me that I'm bringing on more right-wingers than, more extreme Jews than Palestinians, because I've brought on Jews that have said we need to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, but none of the Palestinians I've brought on have said we should ethnically cleanse Jews. So to those who think that this is really so biased, just so you know, people are viewing bias the other way. Similar to how if you ask Palestinians, they're going to say mainstream media is pro-Israel. Israelis are going to say the mainstream media is pro-Palestine. People generally view the world in a skewed way. Now, Hebeldan, thanks for the 15 shekels. Is that wooden piece behind you placed backwards? I don't know. It might be. I'm in my friend's studio. His name is Adam Road, Troubadour. You could Troubadour Adam Road. He's a great musician. You can find him on all the social media platforms. Awesome guy. And that's a piece by Dan Groover. I'm hearing. Cool. It's going to be on Frischman and Dizengoff, I'm being told, in Tel Aviv, if anybody wants to see the gallery. So again, Mossad, you go, Rudy is cool, but he's left. So again, this is from your vantage point, because many on the left, and I get this all the time, people say Rudy is far right. So I'm happy you say that, because it just shows that how we perceive people is based on where we stand on the political spectrum. I once saw a dude write a full Facebook post saying how all of Fox News is pretty much left. So you could kind of see what his positions probably were. Orjan Meyer, thank you for the super chat, 50 Norwegian crown. Shalom, touching to hear the tour guide. God bless you and your company. Shalom. Thank you, Orjan. I truly appreciate the support you keep giving us in the show. Jadaj goes, I wonder if Adar would accept Palestinians to take their lands back in 1948, even if someone is living there now. I do not support displacing people. I don't support Palestinians being able to come and remove people from their homes. I don't support Jews being able to do that to Palestinians. That being said, I do support compensation for Palestinians that lost property in 1948. I do support the right of return. That doesn't mean I support millions of people immigrating to the land a year. No, we need a sane immigration policy. Israel's demographic concern is a legitimate concern. There's no guarantee that in a demographic minority, the Jews here will remain safe, not anytime in the near future. And I fully recognize that. But yeah, we do need compensation for Palestinians that lost their property in 48. And as a Jew, I recognize this. Jews are leading the world in property rights. We've done immense work getting compensated for property that was taken from us during the Holocaust. So I recognize that. Jenna Ali goes, I feel like a video should be done where you just go through something like the International Declaration of Human Rights, because lots of people in Sulha comments are outright against a lot of it. So Jenna, that's an interesting idea. I think I'm going to start doing more reviews, but I'd rather do reviews where we review like a video done by Ben Shapiro or something like that, where we could like debunk people's claims. I'm open to that, but I will tell you that most Israelis would say that they don't support, they're okay to not support human rights if those human rights come at the expense of their well-being. So again, the issue here is Israelis view Palestinians as the enemy. Palestinians, many of them, are not shy in their aspirations to destroy or dismantle Israel. So an Israeli is just saying, yeah, I don't support, I'm not, if giving them human rights is going to put me and my family in danger, no, I don't support that. So many of them, it's just not going to convince them. The way to convince Israelis to care more about Palestinian human rights is for them to feel safe and not like they're in an existential threat. And this is why I say that calls for Israel's destruction or dismantling is one of the single most harmful arguments anybody can ever make. People need to stop making that ASAP. It radicalizes Israelis. It makes them care less about human rights. It makes them support reactionary strongman leaders. Stop saying Israel should be dismantled. It's the single worst, single most harmful argument you can make. Not just harmful for Israelis, but harmful to Palestinians. Let's see. So this is an interesting. Hater Khan goes, your talking points are typically of those of a gatekeeper, lots of blah, 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 AK nothing burger. I'm guessing you're living in the United States because of the gatekeeper comment. It's essentially anybody who doesn't just adopt a very specific narrative on social justice, then you're a gatekeeper. If you don't agree with wokeness, then you're a gatekeeper for white supremacy. The fact that I don't support dismantling Israel means I'm a gatekeeper for Zionism. It's an intellectually lazy argument. If you want to make progress, you know, you could do better than that. That's not convincing anybody. That's why the woke is really such a fringe group that both the liberals and conservatives agree that the woke is problematic. That, like, you know, you could do better than that. Gail Kaufman goes, great conversation, Adar. Hope you had a good bathroom visit. Reminds me of a funny pun. You're Russian to go to the bathroom, the European. Huh, that's funny. It's a kind of a pun you got to read. Yeah, I've actually been drinking a lot of this juice now. This has some clever marketing. Look what it says. The ingredients. It just says 1 apple, 3/4 of a beet, 1/3 of a pomegranate, and a little bit of ginger and water. That's kind of cool, right? I love these juices. They have a whole bunch. So haters, continuing, it's easy to talk about progress if you are on the occupied side. I think you mean the occupying side. Sure. I mean, I'm coming from a place of privilege. My life's good, but I care deeply about the Palestinians. So obviously, I'm going to talk about making things better. Would you prefer that I don't? Like, I'm not quite sure I'm following you. Jadaj goes, you have Ashkenazis mostly. Yeah, probably. Well, I need to think about that, but you might be right. So a little bit about how we pick the guests. Booking and matchmaking is the single hardest thing we deal with. It's very hard to book guests. Most of the guests who have come on are people who have reached out to me personally and said, Adar, I'd love to be on the show. Those people are overwhelmingly men, overwhelmingly Jewish, probably more Ashkenazi than not, and they're left of center. So the skew in demographic, a lot of it comes down to who is most likely to reach out to me and want to come on the show. You know, until we have more capacity and a large team of people who can do booking, it's going to be very hard to create more demographic balance. We are working on it. We're trying. We'd like to have a lot more women on the show. We do want to have more prominent right wingers on the show. Definitely more Palestinians and more Mizrahim for sure. Oh, Nomto is correcting, saying Adar, he's talking about Jews in Israel, not about the guests. He's saying that Ashkenazi Jews have no right to live in this land. So thanks for correcting, but I'm still happy for that question because I did want to explain the demography of the show. Yeah, Jadaj, you need to stop saying Ashkenazis don't have a right to live here. Jews have a right to live on the land. Palestinians have a right to the land. Let that be the base agreement of where we're going to build peace from. No one's going anywhere. We're here to stay. Let's work from there. Ashkenazis are also Levantine. It's true we haven't lived in the Middle East for nearly 2,000 years, but our DNA traces back to the Middle East. And even if it didn't, it doesn't matter. If you're born here, if this is the only home you've ever known, if this is your nation, you still have a right to live here. So even if you don't want to, if you don't care much for the genetic argument, then there's still the fact that Ashkenazi Jews are just as much Israeli as anybody else. Let's see what else we got. Adi Harongi goes, Adar, do you think applying sovereignty over parts of Area C and handing over Area A, B, and parts of Area C to the Palestinians to create two states can work? Yes, I think it can. I'm not sure that's the right solution, though. The two-state solution seems like the best for many reasons, but I'm less convinced than I used to be. The majority of both Israelis and Palestinians don't want to partition the land. They want the land to remain whole. Palestinians want to have access to the entire land, and so do Jews. If we could find a way to keep it whole, yet create a sophisticated mechanism of governance that doesn't have both their demographics competing to be a majority and not giving the majority power to dominate the minority, then I think that's the best solution. And a federation seems like an attempt to solve all those problems. Whoever's joining us for the first time, feels free to subscribe. Tomorrow we're going to do a debate actually on anti-Semitism. There's two competing definitions of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, one is the IHRA, the other is the JDA, which is a newer one. People who helped write both those definitions, or at least signed onto those definitions, are going to debate one another. Let's see. So Jadaj goes again, living in land 2,000 years ago does not give you the right to take it back if someone else living there 2,000 years later. I agree. I don't think you get a historic claim to land, for sure. But the argument now is not the argument Zionists were making in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Today we live here. Today we're a sovereign state. There's human rights issues that need to be solved, but Israel exists and it's not going anywhere. The claim you're making would have been a strong claim against Zionism when it was trying to be created, and this is exactly the reason why Palestinians rejected partition. They said, what right do Europeans have coming here and making an exclusive Jewish state on Palestinian land? And I certainly understand that argument. If someone were to try to do that to Jews, we would reject that as well. So of course I get that, but that's not what we're talking about now. Now Israel's a sovereign state. Ashkenazis live here. Those Ashkenazis are Israeli, and there's no reason to think they don't have a right to continue to live here. Let's see. Anything else? Humin Chen, thanks for the question. How do you want other countries and people to perceive conflict between Israel and Palestine? If other countries are more pro-Palestine, would Israel government be pressured to ease moves on Gaza's? Yeah, I'm okay with international pressure on Israel. I'm completely fine with it. I think that Israel can be doing a lot more to change the status quo. We've done close to nothing to change it the past decade plus. If anything, we've just done things to extend it and make it worse. The status quo is not sustainable. It's immoral. It creates a human rights issue. The international community should rightfully object to that. Do I think that there is a disproportionate attention on Israel? Yeah, for sure, for sure. But again, I don't care about that. I'm Israeli. I want to make the situation better. The international community is upset about the same things I'm upset about. Yeah, I welcome you. You could be upset about it, for sure. Ian Pokris asks, Adar, do you acknowledge that there's an Islamic basis for Jew hatred? Because I've heard you, your panelists, talk about the importation of anti-Semitism and good old days of coexistence. So yeah, there's definitely an Islamic basis of Jew hatred. The Quran has certain statements that are explicitly anti-Jewish. I don't think that means that you know, we obviously know that many Muslims are not anti-Semitic. So I don't think to be Muslim is to be inherently anti-Semitic. I think, as we see with all religions, there's endless interpretations of religion. So the Torah says some pretty horrible things. For example, that you could stone gays. Thankfully, the vast majority of Jews, you know, have agreed that that's wrong. So the same exact thing can happen with Islam. I do agree that there's a basis for it, but I also do know that we have had many years Jews living in Muslim countries where we lived peacefully. It's true there were pogroms. It's true we weren't equal citizens. And I would actually say what probably was the most concerning, even if we could live there peacefully for, let's say, 1,000 years, what happened in 1948 as a response to the creation of Israel was the Middle Eastern countries that Jews lived in turned on the Jewish populations. And they could say, well, we're turning on you because of Israel. But that just shows that Jews being a minority in those countries can be turned on because of not their actions, because of the actions of people in a different part of the world. That should be very concerning. So when Jews don't trust being the minority and they look at what happened in Middle Eastern countries and then look at what happened in Europe, I mean, there's good reasons for Jews to be concerned being a minority. And we even see now that, you know, there are many anti-Semitic attacks in New York recently. It might even be fair to say that it's safer to be a Jew in the UAE than it is in the United States, which is wild, which means we should have hope about the Middle East and transforming the Middle East. Jews can be safe in the UAE. Who knows where next we can travel and be safe. Let's see. We'll do two more. Shai asked the question. We'll go. Shai asked if have you heard that the chief rabbi of Syria died last week? Yeah, I did see something about that. I don't know much about him, but a Syrian Jewish friend of mine shared something on that. Rest in peace, friend. Let's see. So Mossad goes, UAE is safe because they know how to deal with Muslim bros. By Muslim bros, are you saying Muslim Brotherhood? So again, this I'm happy you brought that up because it just shows Islam is not monolithic. People want to hate on Islam and say there can't be peace with Islam. Look at Al-Qaeda, look at the Muslim Brotherhood, look at this. Yeah, but also look at the UAE is a Muslim country, right? So don't be deterministic in terms of what a religion means. Culture supersedes religion. Some of the most violent and brutal places in the world for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years was Europe. Those places are some of the most peaceful today. Scandinavians have Viking blood running through their veins. Those are some of the most peaceful countries. Places change. culture changes. So don't be deterministic. You know, people like to point to bad things in the world and then put their head down and make it seem like nothing can be fixed, nothing can be better. But it's really that type of thinking that doesn't allow us to be creative in how we actually make the world a better place. So acknowledge that there's a lot of bad in the world, and acknowledge that we can, you know, we could impact change. But also don't let other people doing bad things take you away from acknowledging the wrong that your people are doing and that your country is doing. There's a lot Israel does wrong. There's a lot we could do better. And interestingly, the people who rail the hardest on Muslims are the ones who do the least amount of self-reflection on their own country. So, you know, keep that in mind. It also says a lot about a person. You know, there's those people who are always looking around, blaming others for the issues of the world. And then there's the people who try to really work on improving themselves. I think you could tell a lot about a person from if they're blaming others or reflecting to improve on themselves. Anyways, okay, we're going to Masad, you say I make wrong assumptions. Perhaps I'm not always right, but I don't know what you're referring to. You could hop on the show again at some point and chat. We had a good conversation last time. You're invited back on. Alram goes, do you think you should bring more Israeli Palestinians or even MKs? Yeah, I'd love to. Yosef Haddad, who's an Israeli Arab Zionist, wants to. Actually, he told me he doesn't identify as Zionist, but he's a member of the Likud party, I believe, which is interesting because Likud's right wing. But he says, I'm not a Zionist. Jews are Zionist. I'm just a patriotic Israeli. He wants to come on the show. We just need to find an interesting matchup for him. So if anybody has recommendations, let me know. And in general, if anybody has recommendations about things you'd like to things you'd like to see on the show, things you think we could do better, people you'd like to see, reach out to me. You can find my contact information in the description. We're very much open to people to suggestions. A lot of the community suggestions have really changed what we've done. Adam Albelia goes, Sulha, you're always right even when you're wrong. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Anything else? Oh, I think we're good here. I think we're good. But tomorrow, 8 p.m. Jerusalem time, we're going to have Derek Pensler and Ken Stern, two people who contributed to the IRA and JDA definitions of anti-Semitism. We're going to have a good conversation about that. Next week, next Sunday, I'm going to be on Israel Advocacy Movement debating Joseph Cohen, the founder of that channel about ethnic cleansing in 1948. That's going to be a good debate. You should check it out. I'll probably do another live stream on Sulha sometime midweek. Maybe we'll do another cringe meme review. Or maybe we'll review a video. Somebody sent me a Ben Shapiro video that they want to review, so I think that could be a cool one. And Thursday, we don't have anything planned. What we're trying to do is do like a Palestinian panel. We've actually only had one piece of content that was exclusively Palestinian in our year plus of doing this, so we'd like to do that as well. If you all want, we could move it to the after party in Discord. I'll drop a link in the chat. Join Discord on the left-hand side. It says lounge, click lounge, and you'll be connected via voice. You don't need to speak, but you could just listen. Whoever wants, we'll do a little after party. And that's all, friends. Signing off. Much love. Until next time.